Clerks humiliates black twins at the bank, and yells when she sees. Who's the father? It was a clear morning, one of those that seemed to promise that nothing could go wrong. Have you ever had a day like this? A day that starts full of promise, but that holds a silent secret, something that no one could have predicted. Thus began the journey of little Ayla and Luma, inseparable twins of only 7 years old. With their curly hair neatly tied up with colorful ribbons and eyes shining with excitement, the girls were about to take a giant step for their age, the first step toward independence. Imagine the joy and pride of two children who spent an entire year dedicated to a simple but challenging task, selling homemade cookies around the neighborhood. Have you ever dedicated so much time to something that, in the end, even a simple reward seemed monumental? Well, that's exactly what they were feeling at that moment. Every coin, every crumpled note in the little pot they carried was not just money. It was the result of whole days of effort, of mornings waking up early and nights sleeping late with his hands still dirty with flour and sugar. On that special morning, Ayla delicately adjusted the collar of her sister's shirt, while Luma, smiling, proudly held the small pot firmly. They had a clear mission and a precious goal: to deposit all those savings in the imposing Banco Central Premium. Have you ever stopped to think how a simple building, grandiose and cold, can intimidate someone so small and innocent? And how did those girls feel in front of the automatic glass doors that seemed to open like magic? As they walked, the twins imagined their father's face as they received the surprise gift on the upcoming birthday. Have you ever felt that delicious emotion of planning something special for someone you love very much? That was exactly what beat in the hearts of little Ayla and Luma. They didn't care about prying eyes on the street, not even cars hurrying past them. Nothing could shake that childish happiness, but they didn't know that behind that elegant and welcoming facade of the bank, there was something waiting for them. Something that wasn't in their plans, something that didn't even cross the sweet and innocent imagination of the girls. Were Ayla and Luma ready for what would happen next? Could the simple task of depositing money become such a challenge? And as they stepped into the bench, the twins' clean little shoes echoing softly on the shiny floor, an eerie silence seemed to accompany their every step. A silence that hid something that would change the course of that morning, and perhaps their lives, forever. What could it be? Well, they were about to find out. Have you ever felt the weight of a look? Have you noticed how sometimes a simple expression can completely change the mood of an environment? For, at that moment, as Ayla and Luma walked to the counter of the Banco Central Premium, the cheerful atmosphere of minutes ago slowly turned into something gloomy, almost hostile. In front of them was Camilla, the impeccable attendant in her well-pressed uniform, perfectly groomed hair, understated and elegant makeup, but with something disturbing in her eyes, a cold detachment. Camilla barely greeted them, but her eyes immediately went down to the small pot that the girls held so proudly. And then, something unexpected happened. She smiled, but not a welcoming smile. It was a sarcastic, almost cruel smile. Can you imagine the impact of this on two children so young, innocent, and confident? The smile quickly gave way to a muffled laugh, while Camilla, in a loud voice and loaded with irony, asked, "Is this some kind of joke?" And suddenly, everything changed. That short, hard phrase echoed through the bank's spacious lounge, drawing the attention of surrounding customers. Ayla and Luma felt as if they were frozen in time, unable to understand the reason for this humiliation. Have you ever felt so small in front of a crowd that you just wanted to disappear? That was exactly how they were feeling at that moment, with faces flushed with shame and eyes wide with confusion. Around them, heads began to turn, curious and intrigued. Some people whispered among themselves, casting looks of strangeness and even contempt at the girls. Why had that special and innocent moment turned into a scene of public humiliation? Why would someone judge so harshly two children trying to just make a simple bank deposit? The twins' small hands squeezed the jar tighter, while Ayla tried to control her tears, and Luma, the shyest, lowered her eyes, staring at her small shoes. The hall, once welcoming, now seemed cold and silently hostile, as if all eyes were waiting for the next step of this cruel spectacle. But could anyone there? On that luxurious and imposing bench, imagine what that small pot with coins and crumpled bills really meant. Did Camilla realize the importance of that simple gesture of two children trying to honor the effort and love for their father? And more importantly, would anyone notice the man who silently watched everything at the back of the room, with fixed eyes and a rigid expression? Because something was about to happen there, on that bench, something that no one could have predicted. After all, those who observe quietly are not always indifferent. Silence sometimes precedes an unexpected storm, and that morning still held surprises that no one would have been able to imagine. Have you ever witnessed an injustice and felt helpless? Have you ever seen someone humiliated in public for something they didn't deserve? And worse, for simply existing in the wrong place, at the wrong time? Well, that's exactly what happened to Ayla and Luma, two children of only 7 years old, with pure dreams and generous hearts, being treated as if they were a nuisance, as if his time, his presence, were worthless. Camilla, the attendant, did not stop at the mockery. She folded her arms, sighed loudly, and in front of everyone declared coldly, "You can't occupy the bank's time with this nonsense." Nonsense. That's what she called the girls' year-long effort. That was how she reduced the hope of two daughters who wanted to surprise their father with a gift bought with dignity. And as if that were not enough, he ordered them to get out of the queue and stay in a corner, as someone who orders a burden to be taken out of the way. Have you ever been put aside? Have you ever felt that your existence bothers you just by being there? Ayla and Luma were pushed with words to the corner of the room, away from the line of real customers. And there they stayed, exposed, humiliated, vulnerable. What should be just a small step of independence became a scene of public trial. As the minutes passed, the whispers began. Murmured words, skewed looks, muffled laughter. It was as if the whole room was feeding on the embarrassment of those two girls. And no one, absolutely no one, raised their voice to say, "This is wrong." And why? Why is it so easy to ignore the suffering of the little ones, the invisibles, those who don't seem to have enough status to deserve respect? Ayla, trying to maintain her posture, squeezed her sister's hand tightly, as if to say without words, "I am here with you, hang in there." But your eyes, the eyes don't lie. They were already damp, about to collapse. And Luma, who had once smiled with pride, now trembled in silence, not understanding why the world suddenly seemed so cruel. And the question that hung in the air, without being said, was, until when? How long would they have to endure that alone? Would anyone there finally realize that something needed to change? Would those who watched in silence have the courage to act? Or would what would come next change everything, irreversibly? Because not every story of pain ends in silence, and what was about to happen in that bank would make it clear that true justice sometimes begins when someone simply no longer accepts to see what is wrong, and he decides to act. Have you ever felt that someone was watching you, even in silence? That there was a presence there, quiet, but with an energy so strong that it could turn the world upside down at any moment? At the back of the hall of the Central Bank Premium, almost camouflaged among leather armchairs and ornamental plants, there was a man like that, discreet, elegant, but with a look that burned like contained fire. He wore a dark, well-cut suit and kept papers open on a leather briefcase. In the eyes of others, he looked more like a busy customer dealing with some business matter. But his eyes were not detached from the scene that was happening a few meters away. Two children being humiliated mercilessly, treated as intruders in a place where only certain types seem to be allowed to exist with dignity. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone with true power witnesses pain being inflicted on the one they love? With each rude word from the attendant, his jaw clenched a little more. With each muffled laugh, his fingers squeezed the pen, tighter in his hand. But he didn't get up. Not yet. Because sometimes the silence of the observer is not weakness, it's strategy. Marcus Vinicius knew the backstage of power well. After all, he was one of the most respected federal judges in the country. But more than that, he was a father, and nothing in the world is more dangerous than a father watching his daughters get hurt, even if with words. Can you imagine what was going on inside him at that moment? A mixture of indignation, pain, and calculated coldness. He knew that any rash move could rob his daughters of the chance to be seen for what they really were, citizens, with the same right to be there as any other client in a suit. And so he waited. But his eyes betrayed that something was about to change. Those who looked from the outside saw only a calm man, perhaps bored with the wait. But inside, Marcus was a volcano about to explode. And you know what happens when a silent volcano finally rises? It changes the entire landscape around it. And that morning, the bank still didn't know. But he had made a serious mistake. Because it wasn't just a case of misconduct. It was a direct affront to two girls who carried a strong surname, and a father who would never allow that kind of injustice to go unnoticed. And his next action, no one would be able to forget. Have you ever witnessed a moment when the air seems to change density, in which everything around slows down, as if time respected the arrival of something inevitable? That's exactly what happened when Marcus Vinicius, until then only a man sitting in the back, stood up, not in a hurry, not with exposed anger, but with the quiet firmness of someone who has carried the weight of many battles and never lost one. His dark suit contrasted with the cold light of the room. His footsteps echoed like a sentence, crossing the bench amid whispers and curious looks. Have you ever seen someone walk with such authority that the world around them seems to fall silent? Because that's what happened. One by one, the customers stopped what they were doing. Even the sounds of the reception keyboard seemed to cease. There was something about that presence that demanded respect, even before a word was spoken. Upon arriving at the counter, Marcus stopped in front of Camilla. She, until then full of herself, imposing behind the glass and arrogance, now seemed to shrink before him. Her gaze faltered. And it was then that Marcus, with the biting calm of a judge accustomed to silencing courtrooms, simply said, "These are my daughters." The whole room held its breath. Camilla turned pale, literally. His posture collapsed, his shoulders slumped, and his confident expression turned to contained panic. Have you ever seen someone realize in seconds that they have crossed a line they should never have touched? That was exactly it. Because at that moment she understood. It was not just a matter of conduct. It was about dignity. And she had trampled on her. Marcus demanded explanations. He didn't scream, he did not get excited, but his words carried weight. Weight of those who represent justice with their own name. Weight of a father who was injured along with his daughters. And next to him, Ayla and Luma, still with moist eyes, found shelter. They nestled near him as if the world had finally stopped, turning so fast. For the first time that morning, they felt themselves seen, protected. And can you imagine what was going through people's minds there? Those who had laughed, those who turned their faces away, those who just watched in silence. Because now the silence was different. No longer an accomplice. Now it was the silence of regret, of shame, of the realization that something serious had just happened before his eyes and could no longer be ignored. But what would Marcus do next? Nobody was prepared to see that, because he wasn't just a father. It was justice itself in motion. And when justice stands up in defense of two children, the world around is forced to listen. Have you ever witnessed the exact moment when an entire institution realizes that it has made an irreversible mistake? When the mask of formality falls and despair takes the place of pride? Well, that was exactly what was seen when the manager of the central bank premium appeared in a hurry in the hall, with his tie crooked and sweat visible on his forehead. It was as if suddenly, everything they had been trying to hide had been thrown to light, and now there was no turning back. He walked across the room with quick steps and a nervous smile, trying to appear in control. But in front of Marcus Vinicius, That judge with the implacable look, the manager already knew. There was no rehearsed excuse that was enough. And yet, he tried. He tried to say that it was all just a misunderstanding. He tried to minimize what happened. Have you ever seen someone trying to put out a fire with a glass of water? Marcus, however, did not allow it. With an upright posture and firm voice, he made it clear, for all to hear, that this was not just about his daughters. It was about every child ever silenced, despised, or judged for their origin, their appearance, their simplicity. It was about how many other Ayla and Luma had gone through that same situation, with no one for them. Have you ever felt the force of words that do not shout, but still make crowds tremble? As he spoke, a new movement began in the hall. Customers, until then silent spectators, began to reach for their cell phones. One by one, they began to record the scene. There was no longer any way to hide. There was no longer any way to distort the facts. Luma's eyes were still swollen with tears. Ayla, clinging to her father's leg, held the jar of coins as if it were her shield. And Marcus, like a living wall, protected them both with his presence. And that's how what started as a cruel and almost routine gesture became national headlines. Have you ever stopped to think about how a simple recording can transform a forgotten history into a symbol of an entire country? That's what happened. The video spread like wildfire. Social networks exploded in indignation. People from all over the country put themselves in the shoes of those girls and saw their own children in them. But what the bank would do next was yet to come. Because now, an apology was not enough. The damage was already done, and only a response to the level would be able to begin to repair what had been broken: trust, respect, and dignity. Have you ever witnessed the moment when a social wound begins to turn into a seed of change? When, in the face of public shame, an institution decides, or is forced, to do more than just apologize. This is what happened with the Central Bank Premium in the days that followed. Popular indignation has not let up. Newspapers, TV shows, influencers, mothers, fathers, educators. Everyone demanded not only explanations, but action, and fast. The pressure was so great that there was no longer any way to postpone. The bank, known for its luxury and formality, now found itself at the center of a national debate over child discrimination, structural prejudice, and unequal treatment. How could something like this happen under their own mirrored glass ceilings? The answer, hard and uncomfortable, was only one. Because it happens every day. Only this time someone saw it, someone acted, and someone recorded it. It was then that the official announcement came: the launch of a new institutional program, mandatory for all employees, from the board of directors to the front desk. The name? Equality in Care. A simple name, but one that now carried the weight of a public promise. Have you ever imagined an entire bank being forced to look inside itself? To confront their own vices, their failures, their prejudices disguised as procedures? But the most symbolic was yet to come. On the morning of the show's opening, with the press present and cameras positioned, two small, well-known figures walked across the bank's lounge with firm steps: Ayla and Luma. The same, girls who had been ridiculed days before, now returned as representatives of change. With colorful dresses and hair braided with white flowers, they held a symbolic envelope, the program's opening certificate. Can you imagine the impact of this scene? Two black children, only 7 years old, climbing on a small improvised stage, where they had previously been put aside. They did not speak, they didn't need to. The image said it all. It was the living response to what had been broken, and to what was now beginning to be rebuilt. Ayla and Luma, with their small hands and huge hearts, became ambassadors for a cause much bigger than themselves. Because what started as a gesture of contempt has become a symbol of transformation. And now, the whole country was beginning to see that, in order to change the future, it is necessary to start precisely with those who feel the present the most: children. But their journey did not end there, because what those two girls were about to do, it would go far beyond the walls of a bank. Have you ever thought about the power of a small but courageous voice? Have you ever stopped to reflect on how sometimes those who speak the least are the ones who have the most to teach? Well, that's what the whole country learned from Ayla and Luma, two girls of only 7 years old who entered a bank carrying a jar of coins and left days later as symbols of a silent revolution. A revolution made of empathy, justice, and dignity. Marcus Vinicius, their father, knew that this could not be just a case resolved with an apology or an institutional program. As a federal judge, he had already seen many episodes of discrimination swept under the rug. But as a father, he decided to do it differently. He used his voice, his name, and his influence to turn that trauma into a national debate. And more than that, it gave the stage for the true protagonists of the story to speak for themselves. And then something extraordinary began. Ayla and Luma began to be invited to schools, seminars, cultural centers, congresses. In each place they went, they told the story with the simplicity of those who lived in the skin, but with the sweetness of those who still believe that the world can change. Can you imagine the impact of two children telling, with their voices choked and their eyes shining, what they felt when they were treated as invisible? How many other children identified themselves? How many adults, listening in silence, have acknowledged their own mistakes or their omissions? Over time, the girls came to represent something bigger. It was no longer just the girls on the bench. They were now the voices of a generation that no longer accepts being silenced. Voices that speak of respect, equality, dignity, with the purity of those who do not want power, only justice, that's it. It deeply touched the heart of an entire country. With each lecture, a new story emerged. A child who felt invisible now felt heard. A teacher who had never reflected on structural prejudice was now changing the way he taught. A mother, a father, a store manager, a police officer, each one being touched by the courage of two little giants. And perhaps the most powerful question left by Ayla and Luma is this: how many voices like theirs are still waiting to be heard? How many stories of pain could become seeds of change if someone just decided to listen? Because their legacy was not built on the day of the scandal. It was built on what came after. In impact, in transformation, in hope. And when a child turns pain into purpose, the world has an obligation to pay attention. But are we prepared to listen to what these voices have to say? Because what started with a pot of coins, it has become a movement that is impossible to stop. How many times, in the rush of everyday life, do we ignore the small gestures, the shy looks, the small hands that proudly hold out coins? How many stories of silent pain go unnoticed before us? Because those who experience pain are children, poor, black, invisible. Ayla and Luma's story isn't just about a bank. It's about an entire system that still measures value by appearance and respect by bank account. But it's also about something bigger, about the power to turn humiliation into a lesson, to turn an injustice into a legacy. Because when the truth comes from the mouth of someone who still carries innocence in his eyes, he does not accuse, he awakens. And what these two girls did was this: wake up an entire country to a reality that many prefer not to see. If even a child can teach about dignity, what prevents us from learning? If you believe that no child should go through this, share this story. If it moved you, send it to someone who needs to listen. And if you've been silent before, today is the day to use your voice, because small voices can change the world, but only if they are heard. Watch, comment, and subscribe, because whoever closes his eyes to the injustice of a child is opening doors to the failure of an entire generation.